Here is our host, Cheng Li.
Hello and welcome to World Insight special program, Alaska Calling. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. Top diplomats from China and the U.S. wrap up their high-level strategic dialogue in Alaska, Anchorage. What began with both delegations trading barbs gradually ended with a range of agreements on common ground. Both sides agreed to cooperate on climate change, regional and other hotspot areas. Chinese top diplomat Yang Jiechi and U.S. Secretary of State Blinken commended the talks as frank and constructive behind closed doors. To discuss the highly charged atmosphere in Anchorage, I spoke to Li Cheng, director at the John Thornton China Center at the Brookings Institution. In Washington, D.C., Cheng Li, director and senior fellow at the John Thornton China Center with the Brookings Institution. There are diverse assessments about exactly what is the results of the Anchorage meeting. What about your take?
Well, it's both, because the outcome, the closed-door meeting actually went relatively well, and there's some deliverables. But we first need to, the reason behind the beginning. Now, first of all, it's very, very difficult because the new administration is only in power for 2 months. And they're still in the search of a grand strategy. Now, even these people are kind of well-trained diplomats, but still, diplomacy is sometimes difficult. Now, develop a grand strategy is not easy at all. Now, we need to, number one, to have an accurate understanding of your competitor. Apparently, there's some misunderstanding, at least from U.S. side, in terms of their calculation of Chinese position. And also to be clear about one's own objective and the ways and the means to reach this objective. And also should have set of priorities and not make too many enemies. But you look at the foreign policy in the past 2 months, there's so many tensions with Russia, with China, with North Korea, with Iran, with Syria, and now also the border issues with Mexico and South America. Now also, of course, the coalition building is the right approach from U.S. perspective. But at the same time, as the diplomatic, you do also need your other parties' demand and the concern. You should not expect a total victory. And also, finally, you should develop a mechanism to avoid catastrophic scenarios. But unfortunately, I think that the new administration, the team, is still very much under the shadow of the previous administration. They still need to work out the delicate balance between competition and the confrontation. You know, as the Biden administration claims that Washington should seek cooperation with Beijing where national interests overlap. Now, this is a good statement, but you do see some tensions between what happened and what they try to achieve.
What you have just said, Dr. Li, very much a great point. You mentioned about how the new administration top diplomat will be able to walk out of the shadow of the earlier Trump era approach. Now, given the domestic politics, what's likely to be the timeline?
Now, this is a very good question. And the conventional wisdom holds that there's a bipartisanship, consensus in the U.S. supports the strategic rivalry between China and the United States. But then if you look at the local leaders, whether state leader or municipal leaders, it's a different picture. It's a different kind of bipartisan consensus. It's really want to engage with China because they think that it's very important to help the local economy. Education and cultural ties with China should maintain, and they spend a tremendous effort, many, many years or decades. Now, also, as the Chinese leaders mentioned, there's a 50 state, sister state province partnership and more than 200 sister cities. Like, actually also state governments in the United States have set up 27 representative offices in China, more than in any other country. So it's a different picture. The political consensus, we need to be careful. I hope the new administration will look at this aspect as well. Now, some other important interest group in the United States, for example, medical and public health communities, educational institutions, Wall Street, and the business firm will still largely support improve U.S.-China relations. Yes, on the Capitol Hill, there's some kind of consensus, want to be tough on China, and that's still not still very much the case. But the local level, it's a different picture. Now, in terms of COVID-19, despite this lack of government kind of cooperation, sadly, over the past year, and there's tremendous cooperation in the medical professions and scientists, in terms of the data sharing and and also appear on each other's webinars and publish things together, and also, most importantly, join the research on prevention, vaccine development, and the drug treatment. So there's a foundation, positive foundation there. This reminds me that the leaders should not just look at the public opinion poll, because it will change.
Right.
So that someone said, a politician thinks of the next election, but a statesman thinks of the next generation. I hope that the new administration will have the long-term strategic thinking.
Right.
What is the best interest? They talk about the self-American interest. There's nothing wrong with self-American interest. Of course, diplomacy strategy, each country will put the priority on serving your own interest. But should we look the long term, and also should avoid some of the stepstones, missteps.
Very well said. Since you use a quote coming from a statesman, I also have one to share with you and our audience. I remember Winston Churchill said very clearly, if you quarrel about the past and the present, it's very likely you're going to lose the future. Many have been asking that question, watching the fiery start round of China-U.S. Anchorage talk, and thinking, is that how diplomacy will be done between China and the United States? Of course, later 2 rounds may be different behind the closed door. We don't know. But then it also is a question as to what kind of examples does China and the United States together set for the rest of the world? I mean, after all, these are the 2 largest economies in the world. People are watching this very closely. They want to get a clue about where the world is moving toward, and this is what we got. So, Dr. Li, what do you think? The styles of diplomacy, will that be the precedence likely between China and the United States?
Well, first of all, I think that we should not jump to the conclusion to believe the new administration, the new team, will be really similar to the previous team, or even tougher on China, or even more ideological. This is not accurate. I think that we should first to make very clear, because if you think that way, you will lose the opportunity.
Okay.
The same things on the U.S. side, they may also lose the opportunity. Now let's look at the difference between Trump administration and the current administration. Trump administration, at least from Beijing's perspective, you cannot say that the perspective is wrong, is sought to defeat and destroy China in much the same way that the United States, defeated the Soviet Union in the Cold War. Now there's 3 areas of evidence. But you look at this administration, they did not touch any of these 3. They want to cooperate with China in certain areas. They did not talk about the overthrow the Communist Party. They did not talk about Taiwan's independence, support Taiwan's independence. Actually, there's a line, according to Chinese release, that affirm that the one China policy.
Right.
Now, if that's the case, completely different approach.
Okay. Dr. Cheng Li, Director and Senior Fellow at the John Thornton China Center with the Brookings Institution. As always, thank you so much, sir. The Anchorage meeting was the first opportunity for the new Biden administration to get acquainted with the veteran diplomats from China. There was hope that the Biden team would offer a departure from the Trump legacy and consider a reset in China-U.S. ties, but the Anchorage talks proved that this was still elusive. I dig deeper into the trajectory of bilateral ties in my segment, Wait the World. Take a look. Drama.
And then we fell in love.
Okay. Drama, lots of drama.
Not you.
Organization?
Not
Can
you.
you give us
What we
your
had
organization?
with foreign policy of the Trump administration, among which China-U.S. relations went downstream with almost an unstoppable free fall. Well, I was told by my American friends and colleagues that it is going to be different now because after strenuous efforts, there's a new administration with a much more sophisticated view of the world, a much more civilized way in dealing with others. The Chinese top diplomat Yang Jiechi might have been told similar.
我们把你们想得太好了，我们认为你们会遵守基本的外交礼节，所以我们刚才必须阐明我们的立场。你们没有资格在中国的面前说你们从实力的地位出发同中国谈话。
Not surprised that he bursted out after hearing how the U.S. delegation framed the nature of high-level dialogue with those opening remarks. The rest, well, speaks for itself. Mutually surprised might be others who pin some hope on this meeting for bringing back at least a semblance of diplomacy.
Return to normalcy means that the two sides actually speak to each other, which, frankly, in the last 2 years has not been the case.
Because so much of it is painted in this sort of antagonistic manner where it's like it's China versus the United States, I think a lot of people just kind of automatically assume that the position has to be sort of animus, but I don't think that's true.
Now, 3 rounds of talks have wrapped up, with both sides trying to conclude with cool manners, but separately.
这次战略沟通是坦率的、建设性的，是有益的。
We'll continue to consult with allies and partners on the way forward, and of course, on issues ranging from Iran to Afghanistan, through the normal diplomatic channels, we'll continue to work with China going forward.
As I speak now, the Chinese delegation already put out a statement talking about the concrete results of the talks. One of the concrete actionable tasks agreed by both sides is to set up a bilateral joint working group on climate change. So it gives at least some hope to the public about the sincerity and necessity of these kinds of high-level talks. But I really wonder if it is good enough as to let the 2 largest economies in the world to shoulder the responsibilities they should cooperate on, global issues that are important for everyone in the world, including those of you watching this video. There has to be a climate change in how diplomacy is conducted and in how it should be a good example for other aspects of China-U.S. relations. Being antagonistic in words, exaggerating threats from the other, and performing drama in front of the public was a leftover from the Trump administration. Using it as a bargaining chip to seek a deal is falling back to the old tricks of the Trump foreign policy. What we need now is a responsible start, not a deepening wound from the Trump scar. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. The timing of the Alaska meeting was wedged between U.S. Secretary of State Blinken's trip to Japan and South Korea and Secretary of Defense Austin's trip to India. Days before the meeting, Biden also emphasized his Indo-Pacific strategy when he held a virtual meeting with the leaders of Japan, India, and Australia. This confirms Biden's effort to rebuild alliances and court new ones. I speak to Senior Colonel Zhou Bo, Senior Fellow at the Center for International Security and Strategy at Tsinghua University, to find out how China will respond to the U.S. overtures in China's neighborhood, particularly on the security issue. For more on that, Zhou Bo, Senior Fellow at the Center for International Security and Strategy with Tsinghua University. Senior Colonel Zhou, what a pleasure. One of the most important things both sides have been talking about is to avoid conflicts and confrontation. Now, how much do you think the Anchorage meeting will pave a foundation for that?
Very few consensus between the two sides. One of them is to avoid confrontation. So we have to go through risk reduction for our joint good purposes. And of course, where first of all lies the danger. The danger is in our space, the danger is in South China Sea, and with the ever rising competition between us, we have to avoid a miscalculation elsewhere as well.
Well, to say that is very easy, but to do it, Senior Colonel Zhou, with your decades of experience on security issue, is extremely difficult, particularly given the geopolitics right now between China and the U.S. Now, do you see the top diplomats during their meeting and the readouts later of their achievement manage to touch on anything specific?
Well, I think it is exceptional in many ways. Actually, I believe that Director Yang is normally a mild person, but it's the first time that I actually have seen him giving vent to pent-up anger. So this is on Euro, but that, of course, has a reason behind it, as he has laid out. So this is exceptional, and I wonder whether this would be a watershed in a bilateral relationship, but at least it gives people an impression that this is really a talk between two equals. And Americans have made it clear that this is a relationship characterized with competition. My wish is cooperation would still prevail over competition. But right now, it doesn't look like this. It seems that the competition has already prevailed over cooperation. So in this case, what we need to do is to make the competition more or less manageable, even if it is stiff.
Well, we are talking. The Russian foreign minister is visiting China. Well, at the same time, the U.S. Secretary of State is going to Brussels for the NATO meeting and also meet with the EU leaders. Now, it seems that there's a very interesting strategic grouping, apparently, that has been coming into form. Senior Colonel Zhou, is that also your take?
What I would say is definitely the Biden administration would enhance its alliance relationship, which was somehow damaged by President Trump, actually to a great degree. And China's relationship with Russia is, of course, a very close one. The only question is, would it develop into a relationship of alliance or not? Because that, if China and Russia come into alliance, that would be the nightmare of the Western countries. And I would consider that probably is really an indicator of another new Cold War. But so far, neither China nor Russia has expressed its willingness to come into military alliance. There is a kind of a relationship. If you compare these two relationships, one is the alliance led by the United States, and the ever close relationship between China and Russia. The point is, if the U.S. have more pressure on China and Russia, definitely these two countries, taken as top competitors of the United States, will get ever closer.
Very interesting. On the other hand, this is the top diplomats meeting. So when many would wonder, going to be the meetings between the two militaries at the top level. We saw the American Defense Secretary quite busy, in fact, over the past few weeks, visiting one ally and then another country, trying to show some message.
So in terms of military relationship, generally speaking, we still have maintained a working relationship, although it's not a kind of meeting at the top. But I've also taken notice that the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Austin, called China a pacing threat, while Russia is a direct adversary. So that means China is becoming a competitor that is getting increasingly closer to the United States. He also said that he would take a kind of a laser focus on China. That is fine. But as I mentioned before, the largest challenge for the two sides is to avoid confrontation. And for that, we really need to sit down and talk about details. I was notified that actually this is already found in press that in last October, Chinese and the U.S. military had the first crisis management working group meeting. So this is significant in that never before have we mentioned the crisis as such. Normally we mention the accidents or incidents. By mentioning crisis, it indicates that both sides have a kind of a sense of urgency. So that means we really could have crises between us. So how could we diffuse them? So I think the first effort is to look square into the question, to admit that we might really have crisis. So if we discuss about all the different scenarios of crisis which nobody wants to see, maybe this can help us to diffuse crisis in the first place.
On the Taiwan issue, which is one of those areas that's very likely to lead to crisis, Senior Colonel Zhou, according to the readout from the Chinese Foreign Ministry, the United States committed to the one China policy. So to you, is that enough? What is going on right now across the Taiwan Strait and in the South China Sea, actually to many, are very worrisome?
Well, I think previously people really talk more about South China Sea, and nowadays people seem to talk about Taiwan in a different tone. I'm most happy to read that the U.S. representative this time have pledged to honor a one China policy again, because there have been a debate going on in the United States, especially among academics, as to whether they should uphold this principle or not. For example, I actually have realized that there was a debate between Richard Haas and Bonnie Glaser on whether they should, whether the U.S. government should policy or not. Richard Haas has actually suggested the American government to relinquish this decade-old policy, but Bonnie Glaser insists that the American government still stick to this policy. But I'm happy to see that at least the American government officials have reiterated this one China policy and have expressed that they have not changed this policy. Because this is really, really important. It is really the red line for China.
Yeah, but saying it's one thing, doing it's another thing, isn't it? With the situation seems to be quite intense, at least on the sea right now. Senior Colonel Zhou, how big a danger is there that we're running into a possible conflict?
Well, I think most probably the American Navy would still carry on its freedom of navigation operations in the waters over Chinese island and rocks. But the tempo and the frequency is another issue, because I don't believe it is a really big issue on the agenda of Biden administration, because he would be so preoccupied with many other things. And even diplomacy itself would not be a big issue on his table. So if we come to concrete issues such as South China Sea, probably he would maintain the status quo, and China would look at Americans' behavior as a provocation to China's sovereignty and territorial integrity. So the point is, even according to Americans' myriad of reports, the U.S. military doesn't necessarily have an edge of the Chinese military in the West Pacific. According to CNN's latest report, the Chinese Navy even has more ships than the U.S. Navy. Well, at least in terms of, this is quantitatively speaking, not qualitatively speaking. Still, it matters. It still matters because the Chinese military is really growing fast. And the problem of crisis management between China and the U.S. is that unlike the Cold War, where the United States and the Soviet Union have a different sphere of influence and a fully demarcated buffer zone, there is no such thing in China and the U.S. because sometimes the U.S. ships would sail into the territorial sea of these islands and rocks.
Okay.
So for China, we take it as a sovereignty issue. And on sovereignty issues, China cannot cave in. And if China is getting stronger, that means the danger of miscalculation actually is growing higher.
The Singaporean Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, he was in an interview with the press, he was talking about we might be able to encounter crisis earlier than we thought. But of course, he also elaborated on the possibility that all sides work on the issue to avoid the crisis and conflict. How much do you think efforts will be taken to manage the situation, to avoid the crisis, or to so-called prevent it from happening before we knew it?
There are quite a few dimensions to what you have said. If we come to the position of some small countries like Singapore, actually their attitude toward the China-U.S. competition is self-evident, because being small countries, they definitely are worried. I myself have been to Singapore many times, and I have heard so many speeches by different senior officials from Singapore, because none of them surprised me, because their position can be predicted. And if we have confrontation, and the battlefield could be near the home, so that is why they are worried. But as I mentioned before, if we talk about how possible is a confrontation, then I would say this is the last thing that both militaries want. The point is there are no documents which have laid down clearly as to how many meters we should keep away from each other. For example, in the queues, that is code for unplanned encounters, they have laid down a number of factors, not less than 7 factors, or if I remember correctly, it's about 7, or it is 9 conditions for keeping safe distance. For example, what about the speed? For example, what about visibility? All this could change the so-called seamanship. So, above all this, there is another bigger issue. Another big issue is how do you look at the same thing in different lights? Then we definitely would have 12 nautical miles as territorial water and so on and so forth. But if Americans look at this issue, they just believe your islands are just artificial islands. And according to international law, they only need to keep a safe distance of 500 meters. So the difference between 500 meters and 12 nautical miles, you know yourself how big the difference and how difficult it is to keep the so-called safe distance.
All the devils, shall we say, are in the details, just as you illustrated. Senior Colonel Zhou Bo,
Yes.
Center from the International Security and Strategy with Tsinghua University. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us and give us your latest assessment of the Anchorage meeting. Thank you. And you're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Coming up, China-U.S. tensions are manifested in the attitudes of Americans. I speak to 2 Alaskans who buck the trend and want to engage with China. Welcome back. This is World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. Our special program, Alaska Calling, on the Anchorage meeting between China and the United States. The meeting saw top diplomats from the 2 largest economies face off. Although frosty at times, there are topics where the delegates saw eye to eye. The political tension between China and the U.S. has tangible effects on the cultural attitudes toward China in the U.S. While Chinese are familiar with American pop culture, Americans are generally oblivious about China. So I'm so happy to be joined by both of them in Alaska, Paul Johnson and Christine Gato. What a pleasure. Good to see both of you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to see you.
Maybe we want to start by introducing yourself a little bit to our audience. So Christine, lady first.
Hello, my name is Kristen Gato. I'm 26 years old and I am currently a student at Xi'an International Studies University.
So now you mainly stay in Anchorage because you cannot go back to China yet because of pandemic.
Yes. Well, I actually just started last fall at the Chinese university, so I haven't been to the campus in China yet.
Oh, wow. I hope you will have this chance and opportunity soon. What about for you, Professor Johnson? You want to say something about yourself too?
Sure. I'm a professor of economics at the University of Alaska at the Anchorage campus. I'm at the Anchorage campus. And I taught economics in Canada. I taught economics in Singapore. And I did a little bit of teaching in China. And I'm involved in the connection for the Chinese students and Chinese faculty sort of relationship between our campus and the campuses in China. So we have relationships with 2 universities in Changchun, and we've had faculty and students from there visit here. And I'm a very great believer in students spending at least some time, even just 1 semester in a different country.
Christine, many people would ask you, why would you go to a Chinese school at a time when, you know, it seems that the relationship is not at the highest level in history? Why did you make that choice?
So honestly, for me, although I am American, I grew up as a child moving around a lot because my dad was in the military, and I've lived in several different countries. And I guess to me, there's a lot of gray area. Not everything is black and white. I feel like there's always hope for improvement. So I don't see like the grim side of going to a country that possibly the U.S. doesn't have the greatest relations with. I feel like there's hope and that things can always improve.
I love that. I love that attitude, by the way, my dear. Professor Johnson, listening Christine seems to be very sophisticated lady, young lady.
Well, she's very, how to put it, very adventurous and very thinking of the long run, sort of the future, I think. And especially for those younger students who are able to go to China, that's something that we sort of encourage because it's knowledge. It's and also because Americans know much less about China than China knows about the United States, and that's an imbalance, which is a bad imbalance because there can be misunderstandings and wrong ideas, wrong decisions.
Right.
At least if the information side in the U.S. For knowledge of China is better and greater, there is probably much better chances to make the right decisions. And just language, just take language. We have had programs to teach China in the university, but and students will do them, but we need more. We need more because language also influences how people think.
What does it make people think about learning a new language? For example, learning Chinese in America.
There's always going to be a group of students like Kristen who are adventurous and willing to take a challenge, and that they'll go to China and they'll live there and they'll want to perfect their Chinese. And there's always that group. But that's only a small share. So we really need to have more than like 1 or 2%. I mean, the imbalance is too great. There needs to be much more learning. And unfortunately, America, it's just a fact. Americans have not needed to learn foreign languages.
It's so hard to generalize a country, isn't it? But we see a lot of generalization of the other country. I mean, China about the United States, or United States about China, what it is and what the people are like, and why are they like this? Why aren't they like us? We heard a lot of generalization. Sometimes it helps, but a lot of time they really don't help to understand the real thing.
No, I definitely think that there's a lot of generalization, especially from the American side towards China. I know when I talk about learning Chinese or wanting to go to China, a lot of people say the same exact thing to me, like, oh, Chinese language is so hard. Oh, why do you want to go to China? Like, what's there that's not here in the U.S.? But I think that in both China and the U.S., I feel like a lot of people have not gone outside of themselves. I really think that, as Professor Johnson said, I feel like it's really important to go somewhere, to travel abroad and spend some time in another country. I feel like it really opens your mind up, and I feel like it really helps you to see more than just your own viewpoint that you have at home.
Yeah, that's so crucial, isn't it, Professor Johnson?
Yes, it is. It's part of being an educated person, I think. like in Europe 200 years ago, if you were a young aristocrat, it was in the sort of a normal thing to go on the grand tour where you would go for a year around Europe.
Yeah.
And stay
in ancient
France
China, there was
stay in
something
Germany.
like that too. If you want to be a philosopher, you have to travel around the country and talk to everyone to sharpen the philosophy, as they say, Professor.
Yes. Yes, that's and there's no substitute for that. Books only get you so far.
You know, it seems that the diplomats are very much interested in rhetorics these days. But of course, many wonder whether that will get things done. I mean, just as someone who, you know, as a professor, as a student of language and cultures, how do you look at rhetorics vis-a-vis real communications?
Well, diplomacy has its own language, right? Really, and you cannot like listen to it, and if you just interpret it like regular language, it might seem either too vague or too harsh. But they have their own game, you know. They have their own understandings. So I'm not so worried. In fact, I'd almost be worried if they didn't do the way they're doing. That sounds very strange, because it's playing a game, and both sides, okay, here we're going to put down what we think is the most important things, and you put down the different things. And it's better that both sides come out at the beginning than say where they are, rather than pretend that, you know, there's nothing really difficult going on.
But just that, you know, between you and me, what do we want, you know, as common folks, about our life, about our interaction with another country, with the rest of the world? You know, it sounds like a big question, but actually it's not, because it's about our everyday life, isn't it?
Honestly, I don't know if I share the opinion of a lot of other American people, but truthfully, I hope that things warm up. I hope that we can have a good relationship with many countries, not just China. Honestly, I feel like the world could kind of benefit from more relation with each other and more empathy for each other.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if empathy is the word that I'm looking for, but I feel like more people in the world should try to understand things from other viewpoints and not just their own.
Well said. Takes a lot of efforts to do it.
Yeah.
Professor Johnson, yeah.
And I just hope we see more exchange of students. I mean, that's what I really, really would like to, because it's good for the countries involved. It's good for the students, and they need to be able to function and sort of prosper and survive, and that helps understanding. Just the exchange of students. Unfortunately, because of COVID, let's be clear, it's because of COVID. It's sort of damaged that, not because of anyone's fault. So I hope it's a priority when we come out of COVID, so we can. I mean, we had agreements with the universities in China to bring more Chinese students to our campus, and vice versa and so forth, and it all just stopped because of the virus. So we hope coming out of the tunnel, and we want that on the agenda for the future.
I hope then the talks will bring us more light at the end of the tunnel, and I do hope that many would be able to listen to our conversation today, to know what people are really thinking about, not politics, but their own lives and how to make it better with everybody else. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.